You're not gonna believe what happened the day a humble black family walked into a high-end restaurant expecting to celebrate their daughter's graduation, only to be humiliated, shamed, and kicked out in front of everyone. But just when they thought all hope was lost, the doors swung open and someone walked in who would change everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Stick around because this story isn't just about racism or money. It's about what happens when the people you look down on suddenly hold all the power, and by the end you'll see exactly how karma tastes when it's served cold. It was a bright Saturday afternoon when Marvin Brooks, a hard-working truck driver, stepped out of his beat-up Ford Explorer with his wife Denise and their teenage daughter Ayanna, dressed in her crisp blue graduation gown and holding her diploma with pride. They were glowing. Ayanna had just become the first in their family to graduate from a prestigious prep school on a full scholarship, and today was supposed to be about celebration, pride, and new beginnings. Marvin had promised his daughter one special thing: lunch at La Reverie, one of the most exclusive French restaurants in town. It was expensive, way out of budget, but he'd been saving up for months. He wanted to show his daughter that she deserved to be in places like that. He wanted her to feel like she belonged. The moment they walked in, though, the air changed. The hostess, a thin white woman in a tight black dress, barely looked up from her podium before eyeing Marvin's faded jeans and Ayanna's sneakers. Her nose twitched, her lips pursed. "Can I help you?" she said, not with curiosity but with irritation, like they had already done something wrong. Marvin cleared his throat and said, "Reservation for Brooks." "No. Graduation celebration." She tapped the screen, didn't smile. "I don't see it. Are you sure you made one?" Marvin nodded, polite but firm. "Yes, ma'am. A week ago. Under Marvin Brooks." She sighed, tapped again, then looked up with a fake smile that didn't touch her eyes. "All right. Well, unfortunately we have a strict dress code and, I'm afraid sneakers and denim don't qualify." Ayanna looked down at her shoes, embarrassed. Marvin's wife Denise spoke up gently, "It's her graduation day. We were told casual wear would be acceptable for daytime dining." That's when the manager came over. Tall, slick hair, pale skin, a fake smile plastered across his face. "Is there a problem here?" the hostess asked, as though Marvin was the one causing trouble. The manager introduced himself, Chad of course, and immediately turned his back to the family, whispering something to the hostess before turning with a tight customer service grin. "I'm sorry, but our kitchen is experiencing a delay, and we won't be able to accommodate walk-ins today." Marvin blinked. "We have a reservation." Chad's grin stiffened. "I understand, sir, but unfortunately our policy allows us to refuse service if a guest does not meet our standards for attire." Marvin's jaw clenched, but he kept his tone steady. "So the real issue is how we're dressed?" Chad tilted his head, mock sympathetic. "Let's not make a scene. This is a fine dining establishment. I'm sure there's something more appropriate down the block." Denise gasped quietly. Ayanna's eyes welled up, not because of the food but because this moment, her moment, was being turned into a spectacle of shame. People were watching. A nearby table of patrons whispered and snickered. One woman even took out her phone. Marvin looked at his daughter, then back at Chad. "You're refusing to seat us because we're black and we don't look like we belong here." Chad raised his eyebrows, feigning offense. "I'm refusing to seat anyone who doesn't follow the rules, sir." Marvin took a breath. He was about to speak again when the front doors opened. A gust of air swept in, and a tall man in a tailored navy suit stepped inside, sunglasses on, briefcase in hand. Everyone turned. The hostess straightened up, and Chad's entire demeanor shifted like a switch. "Mr. Carver. It's such an honor. Please right this way, your usual table?" The man didn't move. He scanned the room, then looked at Marvin and his family. Slowly he took off his glasses. There was silence. People stared. Chad's face paled as the suited man walked over, not toward his usual table but toward Marvin. "Marvin Brooks?" the man said. Marvin nodded cautiously. "Yes." The man extended his hand. "Elias Carver, CEO of Carver Capital. You delivered a shipment of tech equipment for us last month. Right on time. Impressive work." Marvin hesitated, shook his hand. Chad's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mr. Carver turned to Chad. "Is there a reason why Mr. Brooks and his family are standing at the front of the restaurant like they don't belong here?" Chad stammered. There was an issue with the dress code, sir." Elias raised an eyebrow. They have a reservation? Chad looked trapped. Why yes but. Elias turned back to Marvin. Would you be my guests? Please. I insist. The least I can do for a man who helped us avoid a $2 million delay. Marvin looked at his wife, then at Ayanna, who was speechless. We'd be honored, Marvin said. The entire restaurant was dead quiet as Elias led them to the best table in the house. Chad followed behind, his face crimson. The hostess looked like she wanted to disappear. Elias waved over the head chef and whispered something. Suddenly the staff snapped into motion. Silverware gleamed, wine was poured, sparkling cider for Ayanna, and food was brought out like it was royalty being served. Other diners watched with a mixture of awe and guilt. One woman whispered, I didn't know he was that important. Another muttered, we judged them way too fast. But the moment that really silenced the entire room? Elias stood up, tapped his glass and made an announcement. Before we begin our meal, I'd like to raise a toast to this young lady, Ayanna Brooks, for graduating at the top of her class and being accepted into Yale University on a full scholarship. Gasps echoed. Cameras clicked. Chad looked like he was about to faint. Elias continued, and to her father, Marvin, who reminded me that dignity doesn't come from money, but from how you carry yourself when no one is watching. The applause that followed wasn't forced, it was real. For a moment, the Brooks family felt like they truly belonged. But just as the dessert arrived, Chad returned, his hands trembling, holding a folded piece of paper. He cleared his throat. Mr. Carver, may I speak with you in private? Elias nodded, excused himself and walked a few steps away. The conversation was low, but Marvin could tell something was wrong. Elias's face darkened. His jaw clenched. He turned and looked at Marvin with an unreadable expression. When he came back to the table, he sat down slowly and said, Marvin, there's something you need to know. And it's bigger than this restaurant. Much bigger. There was a thick silence around the table as Elias Carver sat back down, his eyes focused sharply on Marvin Brooks, who was still trying to process what he'd just heard. Marvin, there's something you need to know, Elias said slowly, placing the folded paper onto the white linen tablecloth like it was an unexploded bomb, and it's bigger than this restaurant. Much bigger. Denise looked over with concern, her hand gently finding Marvin's under the table. Ayanna leaned forward, sensing that whatever was about to be said wasn't part of any ordinary lunch. Marvin raised his eyebrows, voice calm but curious. What do you mean? Elias hesitated. Something you don't expect from a billionaire CEO known for boardroom takeovers and Wall Street ruthlessness. The man who just humiliated you. The manager. He's not just rude, and this isn't just about discrimination in a restaurant. I had my team run a background check. Marvin frowned, confused. Why would you do that? Elias leaned in closer, voice just above a whisper. Because I recognized his name. Chad Whitmore used to work for a developer in the housing sector. That developer was involved in redlining schemes, keeping black families out of certain neighborhoods. One of those families was yours. Marvin's eyes narrowed. What? Elias slid the paper over. Look at this. 5 years ago, a development group made an anonymous offer on a property you were trying to buy, then pulled out last minute, tanking the sale and inflating the price right after. I believe Chad was involved in that deal. Marvin stared at the paper. It was all there, names, transactions, dates. His name. The address he tried to buy. The offer that vanished out of nowhere. It had been his dream house. A place where Ayanna would have had a backyard. A better school district. Safer streets. It had slipped through their fingers, and now, the man who'd stood in the way of that future had just tried to kick them out of a restaurant like trash. Denise covered her mouth. You're telling me he sabotaged us back then and now he's here? Elias nodded grimly. Racism like this, it doesn't always show up in obvious ways. Sometimes it hides in contracts, policies, in people pretending they're just following the rules. But today he got caught. And I intend to make sure he doesn't get away with it again. Marvin was quiet. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from rage barely contained. What do we do now? Elias looked around the room. Now. We make this public. That's when things started to move fast. Elias excused himself again, this time taking out his phone. Within minutes, a photographer from a local news blog appeared, followed by a lawyer in a navy suit. A statement was prepared. Photos were taken. Elias wasn't just treating this as a lunch anymore, he was staging a reckoning. But just as they were about to finalize the story, Chad came storming back in, red-faced and sweating. "You have no right to dig into my past. This is harassment." Elias stood calm as ever. "It's called accountability. Something you clearly never expected to face." Chad turned to Marvin, jabbing a finger in his direction. "This is all your fault. You think just because you got lucky with some rich guy's pity, you can ruin my life." Marvin stood slowly, taller than Chad, eyes burning with dignity. "This isn't about luck. It's about justice. And maybe if you'd ever treated people like they mattered, you wouldn't be standing here watching your reputation fall apart." Chad lunged forward, but before he could get close, security stepped in. Elias motioned, and Chad was escorted out of the restaurant in front of everyone, the same way he tried to humiliate the Brooks family just an hour earlier. Cameras followed him all the way out. It should have ended there. But it didn't. Later that evening, Marvin's phone rang. It was Elias. "Listen," he said carefully, "there's something else. My legal team kept digging after lunch. Chad wasn't working alone. There's a board member at my own company, someone high up, who might have partnered with him on those discriminatory housing deals. And if that's true, it means this goes deeper than I thought. It means someone inside my company may have profited off denying black families homes." Marvin gripped the phone. "Are you saying there's a bigger system behind this?" Elias replied, "That's exactly what I'm saying. And if you're willing, I want you to help expose it." Marvin blinked. "Me?" Elias said, "Yes. Your story is the proof we need. I want to make you part of this investigation. Not just as a witness, but as a partner." Marvin looked at his wife, who nodded silently. Ayanna stood nearby, listening. "Let's do it," Marvin said. But before they could start putting the plan in motion, Marvin's house was broken into. Files were stolen. A message was left on his kitchen table. 4 words typed in bold black letters: "Drop it or else." The words on the paper felt heavier than any weapon Marvin Brooks had ever seen. "Drop it or else." Just 4 words, but they echoed through his house louder than any scream. The lights were still on when he walked in that night, the front door slightly ajar, papers scattered across the floor like a storm had passed through. Denise clutched Ayanna to her side as Marvin stepped in slowly, heart pounding in his chest. Whoever had broken in hadn't taken anything valuable, except the folder that held the printed documents Elias gave him, the ones connecting Chad Whitmore to the housing discrimination scheme. That and Elias's contact card, which had been tacked to their refrigerator. It was gone. Marvin called Elias immediately. "They've been here. They left a message." Elias's voice was sharper than usual, clipped. "Are you all safe?" Marvin nodded. "Yes. For now." Elias sighed heavily. "We underestimated how far this rabbit hole goes. I thought we were exposing a crooked manager and maybe a few real estate tricks, but this? They're scared. That means we're getting close." Marvin clenched his fists. "They want me silent." Elias responded, "Then we get louder." The next morning they met in Elias's downtown office, a towering glass building that overlooked the city like a watchtower. Marvin sat at the head of a long conference table, not as a guest this time but as an equal. Elias introduced him to Maya Trenton, a fierce civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking down corporate giants. "Marvin, meet your new legal representation," Elias said. Maya smiled. "You're not just a victim anymore, Marvin. You're the face of something bigger." They launched what the media would soon call the Brooks Initiative, a public movement to investigate and expose systemic racial bias in real estate and hospitality. Elias funded it personally. Marvin became its spokesperson. News stations picked up the story of the restaurant incident, but it wasn't just about Chad anymore. It became about every black family denied housing. Every time someone was told, "Sorry, this neighborhood isn't for you." Every accidental loan rejection. Marvin gave interviews, his calm voice and strong moral compass striking a chord with thousands. Donations flooded in. Whistleblowers came forward. But the higher they climbed, the more vicious the pushback became. One night, Denise found slashed tires on Marvin's car. Ayanna's school called, they'd received a threat. Police increased patrols around their home, but Marvin knew this was no longer just about personal revenge. It was war. One of Elias's board members, a man named Charles Remington, suddenly resigned without explanation. Anonymous sources claimed he was the internal connection helping Chad and others bury housing discrimination under fake LLCs and dummy corporations. Charles denied everything, but his name kept appearing on key documents. When Elias confronted him, Charles made a veiled threat. "If you keep going down this road, Elias, you'll lose more than just money." But Elias didn't stop. And neither did Marvin. Then came the breaking point. A former employee of Remington stepped forward. Her name was Cassandra Miles. She'd worked for him for 6 years, unaware of the full extent of his dealings until she started noticing the same pattern. Black applicants getting denied for housing, loan approvals altered after she submitted them, entire neighborhood projects getting rerouted to favor wealthy white buyers. She had documents, emails, even recordings. And she wanted to testify. Elias flew her in quietly and arranged for Maya to debrief her. They planned to go public in 1 week, with Cassandra's evidence, Marvin's story, and the restaurant incident as the inciting spark. But then Cassandra disappeared. Gone. Phone off. Apartment empty. No signs of forced entry, no notes, no emails. Just gone. Maya was furious. "We had her under watch." Elias slammed his fist on the table. "This is a message. They're trying to make her vanish, like they've done to so many others." Marvin sat in silence. His mind raced. "We can't let this die." Denise nodded firmly. "You said it yourself. They're scared. Let's make them terrified." So Elias decided to go nuclear. They bought out the restaurant. Quietly. Using a shell company. Within 24 hours, the ownership papers were signed, and the once prestigious fine dining establishment that had humiliated the Brooks family now belonged to the very people it had tried to exclude. Marvin walked in the next morning, not in dress clothes but in a simple t-shirt, holding Ayana's hand. The waitstaff looked up in confusion as he calmly announced, "As of today, this restaurant belongs to me." Gasps echoed through the room. One of the chefs dropped a pan. A few hours later, Marvin called a press conference in the same dining room. Elias stood beside him. Denise and Ayana were in the front row. Marvin took the podium. "2 weeks ago, my family was kicked out of this restaurant for no reason other than the color of our skin. That's where this started. But that's not where it ends. Today this place is under new ownership. And we're turning it into something more than just a restaurant. We're building a community center, a scholarship fund, and a job training facility, right here. We're calling it the Brooks Table. Because every family deserves a seat." The room erupted in applause. The moment went viral. Hashtags exploded across social media. Hashtag Brooks Table, hashtag Justice is served, hashtag From Victim to Victory. The story hit national news. Elias's company was flooded with messages. Most supportive, some threatening. But the real firestorm started when Marvin was approached by a major investigative journalist. "We found Cassandra," the reporter said quietly, handing him a flash drive. "And you need to see this." The drive contained a single video. Cassandra. Disheveled. Nervous. Speaking into a phone camera from what looked like a basement. "If you're seeing this, it means I couldn't get out. But I need the world to know, Charles Remington isn't just covering up racism. He's funding private surveillance on whistleblowers, burying records, even bribing police officers. He's running a criminal operation, and it's tied to more than just housing. He's tied to a group laundering money through shell companies that buy and flip real estate using fraudulent loans. I have proof. It's all in a safety deposit box under my sister's name. Box 112. Chase Bank. Brooklyn branch. If anything happens to me, go there." Marvin stared at the screen. Denise's eyes were wide with fear. Elias said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood up and said, "We're going to Brooklyn." The air in the Brooklyn branch of Chase Bank felt heavier than normal. Marvin Brooks stood silently in the lobby, Denise by his side, Ayana held tightly in her arms. Elias paced nearby, dressed in a sharp black suit with a manila folder tucked under one arm, while Maya Trenton, calm but alert, handled the security clearance at the front desk. Box 112. That's all they needed. One box, containing everything Cassandra risked her life to protect. The evidence that could bring an entire network of corruption crashing down. The bank manager arrived, pale and visibly nervous. "You said, safety deposit box 112? Registered under a Sandra Miles?" Maya stepped forward and presented her court-ordered access letter. "Yes. We have federal authority." The manager's hands trembled slightly as he led them to the vault. As the door clanked open, time seemed to stop. The room was cold, silent. The smell of old paper and steel filled the air. The manager retrieved the box with gloved hands and placed it on the table in front of them. Marvin opened it slowly. Inside were stacks of documents, flash drives, photos, and a sealed envelope with the words, "For Marvin Brooks." He picked it up gently and opened it. The letter inside, handwritten, read, "Marvin, if you're reading this, I didn't make it out. But that's okay. Because if you're here, then the truth has a chance to live. This isn't just about me. Or you. Or even that restaurant. This is about all of us. This box has records that connect Charles Remington to illegal property seizures, offshore accounts, and police bribery, all traced. Use it. And don't let them silence us again. Cassandra." Marvin clenched his jaw. He looked at Elias. "Let's burn it all down." The documents revealed more than any of them had expected. Charles Remington had orchestrated fake foreclosures on hundreds of Black and Latino families' homes. He worked with local judges to push cases through quietly, reclaiming land for development and profit. Worst of all, he'd funneled millions through real estate trusts disguised as community programs, using nonprofits to launder the money. One of the programs had been underwritten by Chad Whitmore, the same man who threw Marvin's family out of the restaurant. With this information, the team acted fast. Within 24 hours, Elias's media company broadcast a full exposé, complete with verified documentation, whistleblower interviews, and Cassandra's video. It was aired nationally, then globally. Major outlets picked it up. Within days, Charles Remington was under federal investigation. His assets were frozen. His office was raided. Chad Whitmore tried to deny any involvement, but emails uncovered from Cassandra's files showed direct communication between him and Charles about handling undesirables in public venues. The story dominated headlines. Public outrage exploded. Protests erupted outside Whitmore's properties. Customers boycotted his restaurants. Sponsors pulled out. Maya Trenton filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of over 200 families whose homes had been stolen through fraud. Marvin Brooks was listed as the lead plaintiff. The case was called Brooks versus Remington et al. But Marvin didn't stop there. He poured more of his fortune, alongside Elias's backing, into expanding the Brooks table, turning it into a nationwide initiative. Not just a restaurant but a model, a place where the underserved could come to eat, learn, and launch careers. It offered culinary training, job placement, mental health support, and housing assistance. The once racist restaurant that humiliated Marvin became a beacon of hope across the country. CNN called it the most meaningful transformation of a restaurant in U.S. history. Time magazine put Marvin on the cover with the headline, "From Humiliation to Hero, How One Father Changed the System." Chad Whitmore, now bankrupt, was found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. At his sentencing, he locked eyes with Marvin from across the courtroom. The man who once laughed in his face was now the reason he was behind bars. He tried to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg, but Marvin simply turned away. Some things don't need words. As for Charles Remington, he faced multiple indictments, including racketeering, fraud, and obstruction of justice. His empire collapsed. Cassandra Miles was posthumously honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Her sister received the award on her behalf. Marvin stood behind her, tears in his eyes, hand over his heart. Months passed. One spring morning, Marvin stood outside the original Brooks table. He looked up at the sign. Below it now read a new phrase, "A seat for every soul." Denise came up beside him, holding a clipboard filled with scholarship applications. "We've got applicants from Detroit, Atlanta, Oakland." Marvin smiled. "Let's give them more than just money. Let's give them a future." Ayana, now 7, tugged his hand. "Daddy, can we eat here tonight?" Marvin laughed. "Baby, we own the kitchen." That night, Marvin gave a final interview for a documentary titled The Seat They Tried to Take. The interviewer asked, "If you could say one thing to that waiter, the one who threw you out, what would it be?" Marvin paused. He looked directly into the camera. "Thank you." The interviewer blinked. "Thank you?" Marvin nodded. "Because of him, I learned how deep the rot went. Because of him, we found Cassandra. We uncovered the truth. We built something better. Sometimes pain is the beginning of purpose. Sometimes injustice wakes up a sleeping world. And then he said something that would echo for generations. You can't block someone's seat at the table when they own the building.